Also breaking overnight, Harvey has now strengthened into a tropical storm.
A geostorm.
Hey guys, Future Man 19 here, and I wanted to do a video on Hurricane Harvey because there seems to be a lot of fuss about if Harvey was a man-made storm or in the very least a manipulated one. So in this video I will be going over what I have pieced together from watching all the coverage of the storm and what others have been posting about it. But before I get into any of that, I just wanted to say that my heart truly goes out to those who have been affected, and from all the research that I have been doing here, I gotta tell you that my heart has been feeling heavy. So by the end of the video, I hope to at least provide some justice for those who got hit by the storm and finally settle the case of if this was in fact a manipulated storm. So the first thing that we would have to figure out to answer the big question, was Harvey a created or manipulated hurricane, is to know if we are even capable of manipulating or creating the weather. And even if we were capable of it, what would be the motives behind it? What would be the point of destroying an entire region of a thriving part of our country, destroying millions of homes, injuring thousands more, and having to rebuild it all over again? So let's go ahead and watch these next segments and decide for ourselves.
Yep, there's another way water can get into the air. The water on the doghouse roof dried pretty fast in the warm sun. This water disappears faster because the stove is hotter. This change from water we can see to water vapor we can't see is called evaporation. The cloud from the spout of the tea kettle is condensation of the water vapor from the tea kettle hitting the colder air. The hot water in the kettle gives off water vapor to the air by rapid evaporation, just as rivers, lakes, and ponds give off water vapor to the air by slow evaporation. As the hot water-filled air hits the colder air near the ice tray, the water vapor turns into clouds of tiny water droplets floating in the air, condensation. When the air is quite cold and cannot hold any more water droplets, they collect together to form larger drops, as on the ice tray. And being too heavy to float in the air, they fall back to the earth as rain. Without water in the air, we couldn't live. Our fields would be dry and nothing would grow. The hot water in the kettle gives off water vapor to the air by rapid evaporation, just as rivers, lakes, and ponds give off water vapor to the air by slow evaporation. The hot water in the kettle gives off water vapor to the air by rapid evaporation, just as rivers, lakes, and ponds give off water vapor to the air by slow evaporation. The hot water in the kettle gives off water vapor to the air by rapid evaporation, just as rivers, lakes, and ponds give off water vapor to the air by slow evaporation.
successfully flight tested the first ever autonomous cloud seeding aircraft.
The team capitalized on Nevada's FAA test site designation and are revolutionizing the cloud seeding industry. Meteorologist Cassie Wilson headed over to Drone America this morning to learn more.
DRI's got about a half-century of experience with the science and application of weather modification or cloud seeding that basically involves the use of different apparatus to deliver minute particles of silver iodide into clouds that wring more precipitation out of the clouds than you would normally get if you didn't modify that.
Inside every snowflake and water droplet, there's a nucleus, usually a dust particle.
Cloud seeding is actually done by introducing a few more dust particles to increase the amount of precipitation that we get out of a storm. We do this by several methods, either a ground-based generator that burns the solution and that heat carries it up into the clouds, or we can use aircraft that fly above or in the clouds.
DRI currently uses ground-based methods to seed the Tahoe Basin and piloted methods to seed the Walker Basin, and recently has successfully tested the first ever drone cloud seeding platform. CEO of Drone America, Mike Richards, explains more about the drone.
Well, this aircraft is unusual in the fact that it is a multi-rotor aircraft, but it's also fully amphibious. Originally designed for emergency services, for mapping fires and delivering life rafts. And it is used today relative for testing of the ignition systems for the flares for cloud seeding.
The team hopes to be able to eliminate the human risk factor by using drones and eventually test cloud seeding on large fixed-wing aircraft.
The next stepping stone up with a larger payload capable of carrying more flares, which will mimic the actual use of a manned aircraft.
And the water demand continues to increase in northern Nevada, and as of January 24th, DRI's cloud seeding program has added 3.5 to 4.2 billion gallons of water to our current snowpack.
As we've mentioned, Harvey is still pounding southeast Texas this morning. More than 30 inches of rain has fallen so far, with another 2 feet possible this week. That would bring the total to 50-plus inches from just one storm system. That's the most ever recorded in Texas.
potential for catastrophic weather events on a global scale.
This is going to be potentially a catastrophic flooding situation.
I don't need to remind all of you how many people died from catastrophic climate conditions.
Devastating Hurricane Harvey seemed to come from nowhere, putting an abrupt end to the perplexing 12-year-long hurricane drought in the continental U.S. No major hurricane landfalls have occurred in the U.S. for 12 long years, while the rest of the world has been decimated by cyclone after cyclone. Hurricane Sandy was not a major hurricane, though it caused major damage. How many remember the scenario with Hurricane Sandy? Miraculously, weather forecasters somehow knew 7 days in advance that Hurricane Sandy would make an unprecedented 90-degree westerly turn exactly where it did. Climate engineering is not just a dangerous proposal. It's long since been a lethal reality for some 70-plus years. As Harvey was making landfall, the radio frequency microwave transmissions being used by the weather makers to manipulate Harvey were undeniable. Microwave transmission sources near Brownsville, Texas kept Harvey in check from the south. The Brownsville transmitter was completely energized as Harvey was guided on shore. Transmitter facilities in San Antonio, Texas helped to ensure Harvey would not advance to the north, in addition to scattering and dispersing any and all moisture that did make it that far. The bottom line: powerful frequency transmissions kept Harvey from migrating further inland and breaking up. So again, how did forecasters know so far in advance that Harvey would park itself in Texas and stay there for days? Due to anomalous high-pressure zones locking Harvey in place. Because the forecasters are reading a script of the scheduled weather given to them by geoengineering contractors like Raytheon and Lockheed Martin. Raytheon does all the forecast mapping for the National Weather Service, NWS, and the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, NOAA. Lockheed Martin does the same type of modeling for the FAA. We have the Foxes running the hen house, private defense contractors doing all the modeling for government agencies. The forecast track and behavior for Harvey was beyond unprecedented. Again, how could forecasters know so far in advance? Because Harvey's behavior was not an act of nature. It was manipulation with patented climate engineering technologies. The bizarre track of Hurricane Harvey is a glaring red flag to signal climate engineering, geoengineering operations. Why is the climate science community silent about this? The illegal federal gag order on all National Weather Service and all NOAA employees is the answer. The gag order is on top of the fact that government scientists have no First Amendment rights to begin with. Why would our government and others create such weather disasters in our own country? This is where dichotomous this or that thinking must be abandoned. There's many agendas being carried out at this dark hour in human history. This fact must always be considered and remembered. Solar radiation management is one primary stated objective of climate engineering. The combination satellite radar map shown here is very revealing. Massive atmospheric aerosol dispersions in conjunction with radio frequency microwave transmission grids are used to broadcast the atmospheric moisture created by Harvey into the widest possible region of cloud cover. The brighter the white of the cloud cover shown in the combination map here, the more heavily aerosolized it is. The expansive rainless canopied area surrounding Harvey as it made landfall is immense. The convective zones of precipitation around Florida are also being heavily sprayed with climate engineering aerosols. How will Hurricane Harvey impact temperatures in the U.S.? How will this massive atmospheric water pump help to cool the most populated zones of the U.S.? The National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration departure from normal high temperature map forecast map shown here for September 4th to September 10th is revealing. The extreme temperature imbalances shown are meteorologically and historically unprecedented prior to the recent years in which global climate engineering operations have been an increasingly major influence. Geoengineering programs and processes are completely derailing all of Earth's climate and life support systems. The NOAA map, again, is shocking. Above normal precipitation is forecast or scheduled to continue over the eastern U.S. Chemical ice nucleation for weather modification processes will continue to be a factor in the ongoing engineered cool-down zones shown in shades of blue on this map. High temperatures in the ionosphere heater-induced high-pressure zones over the U.S. West will continue to extend the record-shattering, brutal heat waves there. The dangerous and environmentally decimating heat, UV radiation, and flash drought are not being reported by official sources, corporate media, or most independent or alternative media sources. Harvey has provided a convenient distraction from the planetary meltdown that's unfolding on our once thriving planet. How dire and immediate is the threat from biosphere implosion? It's far worse than almost any yet understand. How anomalous is the eastern U.S. cool-down zones from a global perspective? The global temperature departure from average map is very revealing. The other current focus zones for massive climate engineering chemical ice nucleation cooldowns are China and the polar regions. This is especially true for Antarctica, where the geoengineers are in damage control mode after the massive Larsen C ice shelf collapse. How dire is the ice meltdown in the polar regions of the planet? 2017 has brought both poles to record low ice extent levels, a fact that the climate engineers will try to hide from the public until the last possible moment. Unfortunately, much of the public is still all too happy to hide from unpleasant and dire realities in regard to the true state of the climate and of climate engineering. On that note, the following 2 points must be considered. First, there can be no legitimate discussion about the state of the climate without first and foremost including the climate engineering factor. Second, there can be no legitimate discussion of climate engineering or geoengineering without acknowledging the patented chemical ice nucleation processes and the engineered cooldowns these processes help to generate. The Chinese government openly admitted to this process of weather modification, and popular science covered it. Climate engineering can create short-term, highly toxic cooldowns at the cost of a worsened overall planetary warming. And what does all this have to do with Hurricane Harvey? A great deal. By constantly engineering cool-down zones over the most populated regions of the U.S., the weather makers are able to continue fueling growing confusion, division, and conflict in regard to the true state of the climate and of the climate engineering reality. The massive amount of moisture being pumped into the atmosphere by Harvey is an essential component in the ongoing engineered cooldowns being carried out, again, in the most populated portions of the U.S. The next radio frequency microwave transmission was recorded in Shreveport, Louisiana, almost 2 days after Harvey made landfall. As moisture tried to migrate north, it's being held back and or scattered by the transmissions. The manipulation of Harvey from the Shreveport transmission facility and numerous others was relentless, as this even more recent animation of the Shreveport transmissions reveals. Wave after wave of migrating atmospheric moisture is held back and in place from the powerful radio frequency transmissions. As Harvey tried to drift to the east, still more ground-based radio frequency microwave transmission facilities pushed back, like this one in Lake Charles, Louisiana. What are the other possible agendas being carried out in relation to the manipulation of Hurricane Harvey? The ongoing cyclone suppression in the Atlantic Basin and the Gulf of Mexico has contributed to ocean stratification and thus dead zones. Countless cyclones have tried to form in the Atlantic Basin over the last 12 years. They have been blown apart or directed out to sea by climate engineers. For those who think that this is a good thing, consider this. If the manipulation with Earth's life support systems kills the oceans, we die. If the oceans die, we die. Something to remember. The largest ocean dead zone ever recorded is unfolding right now in the exact region where Harvey is meandering. And this point also must be considered. All available data indicates that there's a growing sea of oil sitting on the bottom of the Gulf of Mexico, much of it from the BP Macondo oil well blowout that a now deceased global expert on the subject said was never actually sealed. This recognized global expert also stated that the seafloor around the Macondo well was fractured and thus leaking crude oil into the sea, and that it had never been sealed and it could never be sealed. He went on to state that the illegal chemical Corexit was still being used at the wellhead to keep the oil from surfacing, to keep the public aware of what was happening on the seafloor. Matt Simmons, who was this expert, was found dead after a CNN interview, dead in his pool several days after that interview, in which he made disclosures that those in power did not want known. Though Harvey is churning up sea surfaces, the fact that this hurricane is being kept largely on or near land means that deeper ocean mixing is not occurring. The oil-soaked seafloor of the Gulf will remain largely undisturbed. And there's many other potential factors to consider: geopolitical, global, oil prices due to the now offline oil production in Texas, for example, weather trading derivatives, etc. Many more other potential agendas, but there are much more dire considerations than those already mentioned. The intentional disruption of populations that can no longer be fully supported by industrialized, militarized society. The planet's life support systems are breaking down by the day. Those in power are absolutely aware of this fact, though their incurable obsession for total control compels them to continue their reign of destruction and decimation. How clear does the message from the global elite need to be before the masses are willing to face what is unfolding and what's being done to them? Climate engineering is nothing short of weather and biological warfare. It's the greatest threat we face, short of nuclear cataclysm. If we are to have any chance whatsoever of exposing and halting the climate engineering insanity, credibility is key. Credible conclusions backed up by credible data. This will help us to form alliances with the climate science communities, the military, and other agencies by standing on credible, verifiable, factual data. We must all make our voices heard in this epic battle for the greater good. Time is not on our side.
We want to go back now to our top story tonight, that giant storm blasting the state of Texas with potentially catastrophic flooding.
But of course, some of the more suspicious people out there believe that this hurricane, at least, and possibly other hurricanes and storms in the past, have a more nefarious source behind them. And of course, we're talking about weather modification and or manipulation, with some calling out the government with accusations that this hurricane was either created or at the very least partly modified or seeded so that it would become more powerful. And a lot of them are pointing to a specific point in the satellite imagery of the storm. And so as I'm letting this footage play, you can see the eye of the storm right here, just about to pass over the Texas line from the Gulf. We have Mexico here on the left. And if you guys haven't noticed it yet, there's a portion in the footage here where it was pointed out it looks like something is actually sent up, an object, if you will, into the atmosphere that either explodes or disperses, creating this very strange sort of U or, massive horseshoe type shape. After which we see the storm and a bunch of these rogue clouds appear, and the whole thing just gets way more massive. And so I'm circling the anomaly here. And I'll loop it over. Okay, and look at this massive cloud that appears out of nowhere, which then takes the shape of a horseshoe. It's the best way I could describe it. Right after, we see a point of light, which some people are saying are an object that had detonated in the atmosphere. It appears directly in the center of this strangely shaped horseshoe cloud as it disperses. And I'll go ahead and zoom in here. And we'll just go ahead and pause it right after the cloud appears. You can see the object in the center of it. And, I do have to say, it does look very anomalous. I've never quite seen something like this before. And as we play it zoomed in here, frame by frame, it does kind of look like, at the very least, something strange happened here. Whether this is something that detonated, whether there is some sort of modification happening here, I don't know. I'm just telling you what has been brought to my attention, but this was pointed out, and it's been pointed out by a few people. People have been emailing me about it, and they've also pointed out that just before this anomaly appears, you can see this massive hole in the storm here that, again, was also kind of strange. There's a total clearing, whereas the rest of the storm, everything's covered in clouds, but we have this giant hole covering almost this entire part of Mexico here. And so the horseshoe appears, the object inside of it appears, and then looks to disperse. And then right after that, we see what appears to be hundreds, if not thousands, of these lone clouds that appear in a massive cluster, filling up this, once empty massive hole over Mexico. obviously causing the storm to grow that much more powerful. And so, yeah, could this be some sort of modification or manipulation? Which, I mean, obviously, if true, would show us the lengths that the government would go to and has gone to in the past to test things like this on an unsuspecting public. They've done this countless times, whether we're talking about weather manipulation and HARP, to the particle smasher and accelerator over in Switzerland, to the illegal experiments that were done on unsuspecting people as a part of Project MKUltra, where they literally snatched people up off of the street and ran experiments on them, injected them, and, you know, we know for a fact that the government has been testing the weather and modifying it for some time now. And, you know, usually a lot of the times when they'll do this, sometimes they won't tell anybody, and sometimes they will very quietly admit that they're going to be performing a weather modification test. One perfect example was in January of 2016, where instead of hosting a press conference or notifying the public in a way to where they would actually know what was going on, the government instead released their notice of intent on page 11 of the Pasadena Star classified section, announcing their plans to carry out weather modification in Los Angeles County. Obviously, the appropriate area of the paper to release such a controversial topic, where it was no doubt noticed by absolutely no one. And lest we forget, the government vehemently denied the accusation of weather manipulation up until just a few years ago. And it is a fact that they are using ground-based equipment that is used to, quote, disperse silver iodide particles into suitable storm clouds that have been developed both for initiating and suspending weather modification activities. And you know, while we're on the subject of this and our previous story about this mystery chemical haze, you guys know what the effect of silver iodide can have in the atmosphere and on people? Well, according to the hazardous identification chart, as it pertains to silver iodide, the potential acute health effects, irritation of the skin and eyes, along with a further danger of inhalation. So, you know, I'll leave that there. Very similar to the effects that were just seen over the beach in England. So, you know, not saying they're related, but just putting that out there. Does this horseshoe anomaly, you know, especially it's a cloud, does it seem strange to you? Does the object in the center appearing seem strange? And do all of these rogue clouds, these clusters appearing directly after, seem strange? You guys tell me what you think.
We can control our weather.
This wasn't a malfunction. It was intentional.
We have to shut the system down. Jake, if you can't stop it, no one can.
Truth Unveiled here, keeping you updated with the world around you, and we're going to be talking about Hurricane Harvey and the truth behind it, because there's a whole lot your mainstream media is not telling you, and we're going to go over that and more to come. But we're going to start with just a brief overview of the hurricane, and also a brief timeline too. But as you can see from this report from CNS, it says U.S. has gone a record 142 months without a major hurricane strike. So that's close to 12 years. And this was as of the 24th, so almost a week ago, when Hurricane Harvey was only a tropical storm and expected to make landfall as of the past weekend. And according to an advisory from the National Hurricane Center, the storm was expected to produce huge amounts of rain in excess of 20 inches, according to some forecasts. Now, that's, of course, what they're telling you initially. But did your mainstream media know the truth about Hurricane Harvey before it actually even happened? Did they know that it would produce well over 50 inches of rain before it actually made landfall last week? Well, let's find out, because here's a report from weather.com where it says Harvey may become the first U.S. Category 3 hurricane landfall in almost 12 years, hurricane warnings for the Texas coast, and then we know that it increased to a Category 4. Now, according to the Washington Post, this hurricane is said to be the first Category 4 storm to hit the state since 1961, so well over 50 years ago. And there are even sources that are citing Hurricane Harvey to be one of the worst storms in history, actually, for the state of Texas and for America, with some sources citing this to be worse than Hurricane Katrina and even worse than the winter storm Sandy. And do you really think it's a surprise or a coincidence that barely 3 days after the solar eclipse this hurricane strikes, not to mention right after EarthX 2017, the major drill that FEMA and your government and Alphabet Soups conducted, and we'll be going over that later on in the video to come. So for those who are still saying that, oh, nothing happened after the solar eclipse, I beg to differ. Because what you're going to find out is that this is yet another martial law scenario and practice run. How? Because the governor declared a state of disaster for 30 counties, including Jefferson County, as of last week. And to make matters worse, due to the severity of the storm, there are more than 250,000 people in Texas that are left without power, and it's probably even more as of right now. And now they're telling you that the Houston area has broke records with well over 50 inches of rain that was reported due to this hurricane. And mind you, the hurricane, at first, it weakened over a period of time, but then it regained traction and regained strength and then hit the Texas, Louisiana areas. And because of all this, we have once again another problem reaction solution. Because yes, this is a man-made storm, and I'm going to prove that to you with actual government documentation in a moment to come. But we see how they've already caused the problem once again, and here they are offering their solutions with what? FEMA and the National Guard. And the first thing that Houston has started to do is impose curfew in this area. And here's a report that says Houston imposes overnight curfew to fight looting, break-ins, and quote, lowlives. Houston authorities imposed an overnight curfew, and this was as of a few days ago, that incensed that criminals impersonating law enforcement officers in the wake of Hurricane Harvey were victimizing the city's hardest hit residents. But we know exactly why they're doing this. And of course, here comes FEMA and all the other federal agencies to come into the quote-unquote rescue. And the National Guard of Texas has also been called in to mobilize for search and rescue operations in the Houston, Texas area and all of the other areas that have been affected by Hurricane Harvey. Now this is from the Facebook page and the Facebook post of the 36th Sustainment Brigade of the Texas Army National Guard, and as you can see right here, it shows you videos and pictures of military convoys that are on their way to Texas, as you see right here. But you also see this phrase here, which I found very interesting and suspicious indeed, as the phoenix rises, the phoenix rising out of the ashes. You even see it on their logo too. What are they alluding to? Now here are those pictures up close that you can see right here. You can actually see the military vehicles and convoys that are moving in. And of course, what they're not going to tell you is that it's way more than just this. If you keep going, you can actually see them right here. You can see them once again right here, all lined up, ready to go. And many more are already on board, ready to go in these specific areas. Now what they're telling you is that 1,000 more guard troops have been activated as, quote, unprecedented flooding has swamped Houston from Hurricane Harvey, but we know that there's actually way more than just this. This is what they're telling us, but we know the storm is much worse than they're actually reporting. And it just so happens that the exact same week of Hurricane Harvey, Trump decides to lift a ban on military gear to local police forces. So what this means is what? The militarization of the police. And the Attorney General, along with the Trump administration, quietly did this and just recently decided to do this. And this means now that local police stations, wherever they are in America, now have the so-called legal right to go and get militarized and have military vehicles and gear no matter where they are. And this comes from the USA Today, where it says the Trump administration lifted a controversial ban on the transfer of some surplus military equipment to police departments whose battlefield-style response to rioting in a St. Louis suburb 3 years ago prompted to halt to the program. And we know that's Problem Reaction Solution that's funded by Soros and all those other elite Zionist terrorists at the top. But then it says the new plan takes effect immediately and rolls back an Obama administration executive order that blocked armored vehicles, large caliber weapons, ammunition, and other heavy equipment from being repurposed from foreign battlefields to America's streets. And this is Jeff Sessions, the Attorney General, who led the campaign for the program's reinstatement and outlined Trump's new executive order in an address to the Fraternal Order of Police, the nation's largest police union, suggesting that Obama's directive was a concession to political pressure applied by civil rights advocates. And they just so happened to reinstitute all of this around the same time as Hurricane Harvey? What perfect timing indeed. And recently at the House Joint Resolution 76 that was passed this week actually, Congress quietly passed a bill allowing warrantless searches of homes. So now the police can legally come into your home and search without a warrant. But we know they've already been planning that, and they've already been doing that before. And they do that when they stop people and pull people over with their cars. And this also just so happened to be passed the same exact week as Hurricane Harvey. Oh, no surprise or coincidence there whatsoever. And it's not just Texas that's feeling this also, because now there are also reports that a St. Louis region dam could also go off due to all of the floods and submerging that's also going on and taking place in this region. And it's not just Hurricane Harvey either, it's many other places worldwide that are being triggered and caused by flooding, monsoons, and even mudslides, as you're going to see from this report here, because it says attention is on Harvey, but flooding has killed thousands this month in other countries too. It says skies, streams, and seas have unleashed tragedies around the world this month, forcing us to reckon once more with the deadly power of weather and water, while we watch and react to the devastation wrought by the remnants of Hurricane Harvey across southeast Texas and Louisiana. We should also spare a thought for the floods that have each taken more than 1,000 lives in Sierra Leone and South Asia. Local officials in Sierra Leone's capital, Freetown, which is located in southwestern Africa, said this week that the death toll from floods and mudslides triggered by intense overnight rainfall, and this was as of the middle of the month, had surpassed 1,000. The combined death tolls from floods amid ongoing and unusually severe monsoon rains in Nepal, India, and Bangladesh have surpassed 1,200. And according to the United Nations, they claim that 41 million people in those three countries were affected in one way or another by the flood. If it wasn't bad enough already, as we already went over, Texas has already received a record 50 inches of rain, if not more than that. Not only that though, but according to the director Brian Long, FEMA's long predicted that the aftermath of the storm would require FEMA's involvement of years, and it also says that they're going to be in Texas for many years, and that, quote, this disaster is going to be a landmark event. On top of all of that, they're also saying that up to 20 more inches of rain could fall in the coming days, on top of the more than 30 inches in some places have already seen, and this is supposed to be as of this week. And of course, FEMA is already on the scene, and they expect more than 450,000 Harvey disaster victims to file for assistance. So that's close to 500,000 people. And it says here that U.S. emergency management officials said that they were expediting federal resources to Texas to help with rescue efforts after Hurricane Harvey swamped coastal areas of the state and forced 30,000 people to seek refuge in temporary shelters. And according to the FEMA's administrator, Administrator Brock Long, he said that close to 1 million people were expected to seek disaster assistance due to flooding after Harvey made landfall during the weekend before weakening to a tropical storm status, the same one who's also saying that FEMA's going to remain in Texas for many years, and this just so happens to be right after EarthX 2017, and according to Trump approved an emergency request for Louisiana where severe flooding also was expected. Quote, "We are not out of the woods yet, not by a long shot," and this is according to Homeland Security Secretary Elaine Duke, who said this at a news briefing. Quote, "Harvey is still a dangerous and historic storm." So much so to the point that ex-FEMA boss Michael Brown is saying that Harvey is worse than Katrina, with other reports showing us that Harvey floodwaters have overflowed Houston reservoirs and separated the levee breach. And of course, another organization that's getting involved is Walmart, because they already have thousands of Walmart trucks that are going and helping victims, that are claiming to help victims. And what perfect timing too, because didn't Walmart just recently install and enable facial recognition programs into their stores? And isn't it interesting and suspicious indeed that Walmart just so happens to sound like martial law? What are they getting ready for? Because also the real truth that they don't want you to know, and many people who have been affected by this storm on Facebook and many other social media places who have tried to speak out about this but have since gotten silenced, but I'm going to speak out about it too. Many minority groups in the areas and so-called blacks that have been affected in these areas are not getting the same amount of treatment and adequate treatment as many others. And we're seeing a repeat of Hurricane Katrina, where many so-called minority groups are not getting the full support, and the government and the alphabet soups are purposefully not sending in aid to many of these areas in so-called low-income neighborhoods. Why is that the case? Is this another man-made attempt and another man-made storm that's been planned ahead of time by your government because they know exactly what they're doing, in another genocide attempt to wipe out the population and certain peoples of the population, another form of Operation Depopulation? Because yes, this hurricane was in fact man-made and is in fact a man-made storm, and I'm going to prove that right now. Now, this is a report that comes from the 1960s that has to do with weather modification from who? None other than NASA, the liars themselves. And this once again proves that your government and all of your alphabet soups have been working for how many years, how many decades, and have been teaming up in order to modify the weather and to create man-made storms, as you see with Hurricane Harvey, for what? Problem, reaction, solution, and to further their plans of the New World Order, Phoenix rising out of the ashes, as you just saw even with the National Guard. And you see there are many other organizations that are involved with these things, such as the DoD, Department of Defense, the Department of Commerce, the Department of Health, Education and Welfare, Department of the Interior, Department of the State, the Federal Aviation Agency, along with the National Science Foundation, and they have another report on weather modification, which we're also going to look at later on, NASA themselves, Department of Agriculture, Bureau of the Budget, and the Smithsonian, and many others. Now, I've gone over this report before that talks about chemtrails, and it also talks about how they modify the weather when it comes to seeding the clouds and cloud seeding with other materials such as silver iodide crystals, and how they're also spraying the clouds and spraying with helicopters and planes different harmful chemicals which also have harmful effects such as allergies, and they're spraying things such as barium and other chemicals that are very harmful and toxic to the body, and they've been doing this and planning these things for how many years now? So when you see all of those lovely lines in the sky, just know that they're not actual lines that are formed there naturally. Those are chemtrails, and they're sprayed everywhere for what? Operation Depopulation. And then there's also this report here too, because they even have patents on weather modification and vapor generators for weather modifications. And what they do with these vapors is they create fake clouds, and they produce these fake clouds into the sky in order to create fake weather that you see, in order to what? Tamper with the weather. Nothing new under the sun. And they even show you pictures of how the nuclear fusion reactors or nuclear fission reactors actually look. And they even tell you how they do it, and then they want you to buy the lie of, oh, it's because of climate change, and oh, it's because of global warming, because they use that lie in order to make you into the problem and say that, oh, you're breathing in too much air, and oh, we have to tax you with carbon taxes and carbon emission taxes. The whole agenda is ridiculous, but it's part of what? Agenda 21, Agenda 2030, Operation Depopulation. But they even tell you how they modify on the weather, even in this patent right here, where it says, a method for weather modification by using a nuclear fusion reactor or a nuclear fission reactor as a heat source and a thermal exchanger charged with water to be heated for vapor generation. The method comprising introducing a circulation pipe for circulating a fluid cooling the nuclear fusion reactor or the nuclear fission reactor or fluid for thermal exchange, and the nuclear fusion reactor or the nuclear fission reactor into the inside of the thermal exchanger to put the fluid in contact with the water to be heated to generate vapor, jetting the vapor at a state of collimation prepared with the vapor discharge pipe into the sky, and forming a cloud in the sky with the jetted vapor for blocking sunlight so as to reduce the temperature on the surface of the earth. So in long story short, just what we were talking about, they use these machines and they use these patents right here, as you see, to create fake clouds into the sky in order to modify and tamper with the weather. That's why all of your meteorologists and your newscasters, that's exactly what they're doing when they do a forecast. They're casting a spell because they already know and are aware of what goes on and how they also do weather modification, just like with this Operation HAMP or Hurricane Aerosol and Microphysics program, improving hurricane forecasts by evaluating the effects of aerosols on hurricane intensity. And this was a report that was done as of October 2010. And this is a 114-page report. And who is this done by and who is it to? The Department of Homeland Security, the DHS, another alphabet soup that's involved with all of these things because they planned and staged all of this ahead of time. Now, we're not going to go over all of it, but I will leave it in the description box below so you could take a look at it on your own time and see for yourself how your government is involved with experimentations and have been since the 1950s and the 1960s when it comes to weather modification and tampering with the weather. And this includes hurricanes and the creation of hurricanes thereof, courtesy organizations such as HAARP and CERN. Now here is another report that was done by the National Science Foundation, and this is a special commission on weather modification and also climate modification also. Now, as we also talked about, the man-made storm, Hurricane Harvey, started to gain traction as of the 24th of this month, so almost a week ago. Now, do you think it's a surprise or a coincidence whatsoever that just a day before that EarthX 2017 met, which was an organization, an international drill that had to do with long-duration power outages, and FEMA was along one of the organizations that met with this, as I've gone over in previous videos. And this was done by the Electric Infrastructure Security Council, or the EIS Council. And as you can see right here, it stands for Emergency All-Sector Response Transnational Hazard Exercise. And the mission is designed to improve community resilience to large-scale, long-duration power outages through multi-sector exercises. And that's very interesting and suspicious indeed, because didn't Houston and didn't the areas of Texas experience a power outage of close to 250,000 people? And it just so happened that this exercise came exactly a week after Taiwan experienced a power outage where millions were affected. No surprise or coincidence there either. Now, the actual drill that took place a week ago was only about 4 hours long, but they were also preparing for black sky hazards that were associated with subcontinent scale, long duration power outages with cascading failure of all other increasingly interdependent infrastructures. And you're going to see exactly how they define a black sky event. Now, according to them, a black sky hazard is a catastrophic event that severely disrupts the normal functioning of our critical infrastructures in multiple regions for long durations. And didn't FEMA say they're going to be in Texas for years? Didn't they say they're going to stay there for a long time? Oh, very interesting and suspicious indeed. And some of the hazards that they also covered and talked about are man-made hazards, including an EMP, an IEMI that has to do with the power going out, cyber terrorism because they want you to believe it's actual terrorism, then also coordinated physical assaults, and then natural hazards also, like seismic events that have to do with earthquakes and none other than hurricanes and other severe weather events. And then a day later, Hurricane Harvey just so happens to make storm and gain traction on the Texas area. Do you think that's a coincidence? Do you think that's just mere surprise? You decide.
What should they be doing beyond that? When you look at the size of the storm and your history of looking at these kind of situations, what can they expect and what should they be doing?
Well, just in general, Michelle, and I don't know if you remember this or not, but I was actually with you guys all day long during Hurricane Sandy, and this looks to me a lot like Hurricane Sandy in terms of the severity, in terms of the warnings that we're seeing, in terms of the sort of the economic output that's going to be impacted. You know, I talked to Mark Zandi this morning, and he shared with me that about 3.5% of the total U.S. GDP is made up in the state of Texas. It's the second largest economy in the country. It's the 10th largest economy in the world, and the entire state of Texas and Louisiana is going to be impacted significantly for many, many days. So the impact of this is going to be significant, and it's going to be significant beyond just that region. It's going to impact the entire country, as we just noted from that story around, as an example, the airlines.
We all see the videos, Paul, of storms hitting a coast, big waves, like Jackie, reporter out there, winds.
Yep.
What we keep hearing about, though, is the risk of all the rain.
Yeah.
Even 100 miles inland, because it's been raining down there for a while, the ground is already saturated. What is the rain risk? Not just the coastal risk, but I mean 75 to 100 miles inland.
Yeah, and that's really, Brian, that's the biggest risk from the storm, is the fact that there's going to be up to 3 feet of rain falling over the next 5 or 6 days. The storm isn't going anywhere. This is something, and I've been doing this for a long time, as you can tell from my gray hair. I've never seen this before, where we're going to have a Category 2, maybe Category 3 storm hit the coast, basically stop, go offshore, and then come back again. So we're going to be talking about this for many days. Therefore, that's going to lead to what's been described as catastrophic flooding across a broad swath of southern Texas, and the impact of that is going to be very, very significant. We're going to be talking about this for many days.
I think months, because when you mentioned you were with us with Sandy. You know, many people in southern Manhattan who couldn't move back into their apartments for months and months and months because the flooding was so bad. A lot of the infrastructure, the electronics infrastructure, was in the basement of the building. And so if you're talking about wide swaths of Texas suffering from large amounts of flooding too, it's got to be catastrophic for a lot of people down there. They're probably going to be affected for months.
Yes, absolutely. And there's going to be people that are displaced. You know, both during Sandy and also during Katrina, there were large populations of folks that had to move out of where they were living and move out for a long period of time. So there's a potential for a very long-term impact, a very long-term economic impact across a vital part of the U.S. Obviously, the oil infrastructure and all those businesses down there. So this is a really, really serious issue. It's the biggest issue, certainly, that we've seen, weather issue, since Hurricane Sandy, without a doubt.
So it seems that we in fact do have the capability of manipulating the weather and even creating it, and we certainly have the motives to do so. We see that corporate interests are being heavily involved here, just like they were in Katrina, that will make millions if not billions off the rebuilding phase. We also can plainly see the motives of our U.S. government with the newly created agencies to provide relief for, spending billions of our tax dollars, effectively keeping our country in debt forever to the Federal Reserve banking system. Interesting to note that Texas only recently switched to a gold-backed bank standard instead of relying on the Federal Reserve. That's very interesting, because coincidentally enough, This was the exact same scenario that happened in the Middle East when we decided to invade Iraq. And we all know it wasn't because of the whole WMD lie that they gave us. It was in fact because Iraq was giving up the US dollar in favor of the euro. And our US government was certainly not pleased about that. And even more recently, in the Philippines, when last year in 2016, their president ordered the removal of all US forces and dismantling of their bases. And then what happened soon after? About 6 months later, the Philippines was hit with a huge tropical storm, similar to the strength of our own tropical storm hitting Texas now. Interesting, right? Maybe just another coincidence? But fortunately, I just don't believe in coincidences anymore, because when there are so many pieces of a puzzle that fit too perfectly together, it creates a bigger picture of an undeniable reality of what is actually going on behind the scenes. And until next time, this is Future Man 19 signing off. And remember, keep your eyes open and your heart working. Take care.